Hello, everyone. Welcome. Thanks for coming. My name is Dan Hurd. I'm the Director of Adult Programs at Writers and Books. This is a special Writers and Books event for our members and supporters. Thank you so much. We could not do this without you. We're especially grateful for your support through this last difficult year. We're so pleased and excited to bring you a conversation between award-winning author Heather Lanier and our own Director of Youth Education, Sally Bittner Bonn. You can send us questions or comments in the chat or Q&A function. I hope you can join us immediately following to our 7:30 event. Heather will be reading from her memoir, Raising a Rare Girl, and discussing it with Stephen Cusisto. We'll put the link in the chat. Without further ado, I'd like to turn it over to Sally and Heather.
Hello, good evening. Welcome. So glad you're all here joining us. And thank you so much to all of our Writers and Books members and supporters. We're glad to have you here. And welcome, Heather. I'm so glad to be able to have this conversation with you this evening.
Thanks, Sally. I'm glad to have it too.
Excellent. So we're here, we're going to talk about pandemic recovery. But before we do that, I just want to talk a little bit about your book, acknowledge the way that you write about your child who has a disability in such a thoughtful and engaging way. We often talk about books as windows or mirrors, a window where we can look through and have a brand new experience that's completely different than our own, or look in a mirror and see a reflection of our own lives. And when I read your book, it's absolutely a mirror for me in terms of the way, as we both parent children with disabilities, and the way that you view your child as a whole human being who does not need to be fixed, does not have anything wrong with her. She, the idea of normalizing disability is so valuable. And, that's also, not only is that such a huge part of your book and your writing in general, but that's a major topic of your TED Talk as well. Anyone who's listening, if you haven't watched Heather's TED Talk, definitely look it up and take a look. It has nearly 3 million views now, which is just incredible. But this just brings to mind the whole idea of the social model of disability versus the medical model of disability. And I'm wondering if you would just talk a little bit about that first and how that impacts your family.
Yeah. I think the people who've done really great work in articulating the difference between the social model and the medical model of disability are other disabled writers and activists, that I've gotten the chance to learn from them. But I think it was when Fiona was, a really, really, really tiny baby, and we were having to navigate early, like I'll read from in the book, having to be in the presence of the medical world. Immediately, because she was born in a hospital. And I saw the way that the doctors and nurses saw her, and I saw I'll read about this, but I saw their concern, but also their sort of sense of like something is wrong. And I was holding a human that had been in my body that like I did not order up, I didn't design, I didn't like create a spreadsheet for in any way. Like, just like, wow, this person came from me. And I mean, like, miracle of life is so cliche that it's like a 1970s documentary or 80s or something. But it really felt like, the medical world is looking at this person with this sense of like, oh, something is wrong here. What's the problem? And I'm a new mom with all kinds of, learning to do in any kind of mothering fashion, but was looking at her like, wow, like this is a mesmerizing human being that I'm also now in charge of, which is terrifying in its own right. So I think like the first couple of minutes of my daughter Fiona's life, I was immersed in the medical model, while also just feeling like that's not the way I'm seeing my kid at all. The social model, so the medical model has this sense that like bodies should fit into the bell curve, like the sweet fat high points of the bell curve, and when they don't, a lot of doctors and nurses get very disturbed and agitated and want to fix, and if they can't fix, then kind of get disinterested. And that's not all doctors and nurses. And I certainly write about in the book like the people who've encountered them and who've not held tight to that view, but it's lots of them. And then the social model of disability is the sense that that human bodies are great as they are, but our social construct is sometimes designed in ways to create disabling functions. So like if you're in a wheelchair and you're faced with a bunch of steps, then that social structure of those steps is disabling, because your wheelchair can't get up that step. You need a ramp. So I don't know, Sally, you have literal experience with that example. So do you want to elaborate?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, what you share is so true. But the idea, I think the idea that we are all whole and the world has made decisions about, who has access and who doesn't. And it really is just a simple matter of access and accommodation. I mean, constantly we're having to deal with, does this place have ramps? Is this place accessible? Very few private homes are accessible. The simple access that people tend to be used to isn't necessarily there. And the same thing, I mean, here we live in Rochester, which has the largest per capita deaf population in the country. And same thing, we have closed captions this evening. We don't have a sign language interpreter tonight, but is basic language accessible? And I think that's important things to think about. And I mean, this ties right into this experience we've just had over these past 15 months of this pandemic, where the disability community has, I think, taught so many people so much about how to exist in the world. And pre-pandemic, there were so many thoughts about, oh no, you can't possibly work from home. Oh no, we can't possibly offer this Zoom option. Oh, well, actually, you absolutely could have. And now, because the whole world was thrust into that experience, hopefully, there has become a new sense of awareness around this.
Yeah.
So, I mean, speaking of the pandemic, you've just started this new blog series, the Pandemic Recovery Diaries.
Yeah.
And can you talk a little bit about what sparked that and what your thoughts and plans are? Your very first post was so moving about the experience you had with the president of the college that you teach at.
Yeah, it's so lovely that the president of the university I teach at, it's a large university, a state school, and so when the university gets together, it's not often, it's called like University Assembled, and so everyone's there, and the first message was, we all need to heal. And I thought, wow, like what a really gracious and true message from one's boss, like the boss of my boss of my boss, saying, we need to heal from this. Like, it's not like you can just sort of flip a switch and act like the past year plus was like, okay, we can get over this. I think not only is it a sort of slow, I mean, I've listened to also to people in interviews where they say, when are we going to get back to normal? Assuming that you even think that back to normal is a good idea, which I think you point out is not entirely the case. It's not a good idea to jump back into a world that doesn't accommodate or create access. among other things. But the sense of like, when will we be able to do the things we used to do if we could do them then? And somebody on like NPR said, well, eventually it'll be slow. Like it'll be one day, maybe a year, you'll realize you're laughing with a group of strangers and no one's worried. It could be slow like that. So there will be eventually a time, I guess, when like, we're sort of back to something, but it just felt like I really felt like I needed to do some deep, like backwards looking, like, wait, what did we just do? Like, what? I can't believe that like my kids didn't really attend school very much. I mean, I think, I don't know that a lot of kids didn't attend school at all. Our kids were in school 8 hours a week, sometimes 16, eventually for about a month, like 20, but we essentially had very little them and stress them. Oh, my connection's unstable. Am I there?
You froze for just a moment, but you're here now.
Okay, good. So I just think everybody's got these like ways that we had to wear this life in these complex, heavy ways. And I just wanted to like look back and take stock of what we just did, because I found myself really exhausted, but not physically. Mostly like mentally exhausted, where it's really hard for me to make decisions, or I think I used to multitasking all the time, that my brain like sort of needed to turn down, like a turn off, to like reboot. Like Anne Lamott says, if you just unplug, like, you just unplug yourself for, a while and turn yourself back on, it might work again. So I wanted to just spend a little time writing about like, wait, what did we just do? Can we just take stock of that? And then also, how are we going to move forward, and what does moving forward look like? And a number of little ideas for posts that I'll be maybe writing, but I also am burnout like many people. So the idea of like adding more to my list, I didn't want to make it like a high pressure blog. So occasionally, if I have time, and something's coming together, I'm posting these new pandemic recovery diaries, which I try to reflect on some like little nugget of what I've thought about in terms of what it means to have done what we've done and to move forward in some way.
Yeah, I appreciate so much what you say about the decision making. I feel like in the early days of the pandemic, we were constantly making decisions with very little information that was constantly changing. And that was completely exhausting. And then for a while, we kind of knew what was okay and what wasn't. And we had made the decisions for our family, how we were going to operate. So from a decision standpoint, there was kind of a reprieve in the middle. It was still, the isolation and the remote schooling, et cetera, was still completely exhausting.
Yeah.
For me and our family, I feel like we've moved into a new phase of decision fatigue, because our son is 12, so he's just newly vaccinated, and now we have to decide, okay, he's in a risk group for COVID. So does the world just open completely back up? Where are we wearing masks? Where aren't we? Who are we seeing? Who aren't we seeing, et cetera? Yeah. Are you having similar experiences around that, or just decision making in general, because you're just mentally exhausted from the year?
Yeah, I do think you're right that like, as anytime there's transition into new phases, whether it's transitioning into like new science, transitioning into new variants that like we suddenly want to learn about, a lot of new research about, for a while we were learning it. I mean, the mask thing was, we weren't wearing masks, right? And then we were wearing masks, and then it was doubling masks was a good idea. It's like just this constant sense of trying to adjust to the science. And then we've got the science of the vaccines, which we're all just sort of like living experiments about like how long they will last, or how they will work against variants. So So yeah, I imagine that many people are experiencing decision fatigue on those levels, you know. But I actually do experience decision fatigue in like really small ways, where someone says like, do you want to have your appointment at 1 o'clock, 2 o'clock, or 3 o'clock? And I'm like, oh, I don't know. You know? And then it takes me forever to make that decision. And then the worst part is when they write you back, hey, I have an opening at 1 and you picked 3. Are you sure you want 3? So there's something about like, I think all of those big decisions that we were constantly making. I don't think I'm the only one that like, you know, these ways of doing things that you could count on, like school, like sending your kid to school for 7 hours a day, or being able to go to the grocery store or whatever it is. That all of that, you know, having to rethink all of those behaviors has made decisions really challenging. So yeah, I'm trying to like, I think one tactic is if you can just decide once and kind of move forward, or if you can also like try to decrease the amount of decisions, you know, with like routines and simplifying. I think for me, like trying to think, have I just made my life too complicated right now? I mean, it might not have been too complicated in 2018 to manage this, that, and the other thing. But in 2021, you know, maybe I can handle one event and one doctor's appointment a week and that's it, or, you know, whatever it is.
Yeah, yes, agreed. Agreed. And it'll be interesting to see, you know, how this plays out. And I'm sure it's different for everyone as well.
Mhm.
So you're one of these authors who had her book come out during the pandemic here last summer. Can you talk a little bit about what that was like for you? Yeah, I'm sure there were, you know, many downfalls, but perhaps some bonuses to that as well.
Yeah, I mean, I think Zoom events are great. You know, I mean, it allows like people from across the world to attend readings. So that's been really great. I actually, I hope they can, I think they will continue for a lot of organizations, because I realize people are probably many of us are Zoom fatigued, because we've been saturated. But I think as we go forward, we'll have a mix, you know, of like great online events and in-person events. So that was good. I think having a book come out in a pandemic, it's sort of humbling, because it's like, oh, the world is on fire, and the world is on fire multiple ways, and was very alarmingly in July of 2020. So, you know, my own like thrill of having a book come out was like put in perspective, you know, and I still tried to like to celebrate, but to people sent me flowers and that was lovely. But we had to take my one daughter to get a COVID test that very day that the book came out, because she had a cold and we didn't know what it was. So so that was just humbling, I guess. You know, it puts things in perspective.
Indeed, indeed. And the paperback version of your book is out just this week. So congratulations on that. That's exciting.
Thanks. Yes, they have new outfits. So this is the hardback, and then this is the paperback, and this one is the new. It's like a new outfit. It's like a wardrobe change, kind of.
Yeah, yeah. You posted that adorable video of Fiona opening the box of books on social media and seeing herself on the cover. That was sweet.
She did it. So she actually, we approved that with her beforehand. So she knew that she was, I mean, I don't know if she remembered, but I did say like, is this okay? What do you think? And as best as I could tell, she was okay with it. But yeah, I wanted to unbox it with her, since she's all over the cover of every one of the copies.
That's great. That's great. So the pandemic has impacted people who are creative in all different kinds of ways. I know that some people were totally paralyzed by the pandemic from a creative standpoint. Some people just found that they flourished. What has been your experience over the trajectory of the last 15 or so months?
Well, that's a great question. I'd love to know your experience too. But you know, initially, for me, there was like a flurry of meaning making, where I was writing these like little slice of life kind of essays I think it was this sort of, I actually in retrospect think it was a bit of like, I have to make this mean something. Like, what does this mean? You know, the world shut down. We should record this. We should try to put this into language and order. And, you know, it was really premature because we didn't know where we were in the world, in the chronology of the events. We didn't know a lot. So I look back and I see I had these, like a number of these little essays that I didn't necessarily publish, but I was just trying to like write my way through where we were. I think I got very interested in writing short things. And I think that's partly because writing a whole book of like one's life requires a tremendous amount of like wrapping one's brain around a whole story, a long story. And this Racing a Rare Girl is not a series of essays. I mean, it really is like a book length narrative where I was trying to create this continuity and this narrative momentum across the whole book. And I was really, as I was writing it, I kept having to push aside any interest in like a poem or a short literary essay that, you know, I knew would be distracting and I needed to put a lot of energy into the book. So I was already pretty eager for writing short things after this book, but something about, I think, the level of multitasking that we've had to do, the level of like the fractured thinking, the amount of information we've been processing, and the disrupted sleep, which I just live with as a result of our own situation with Fiona. I've gotten really interested in, not really, but like I just want to write little things, little short things. So I've been working on poems, and I finished up a poetry like manuscript that I had kind of had in the works and put aside. It's short, it's just a chapbook. And then, yeah, I mean, sometimes these like short op-eds right now. I think I'll have to like build up my endurance again for longer things eventually. How about you? What's your process for creative life been like?
Yeah, in the beginning, I was just completely frozen. I felt like I had no idea how to write at all. In fact, in the very beginning, I felt like I couldn't even read other than the news. I was just kind of, you know, constantly visiting different news websites and reading articles. And, you know, eventually I made my way back to reading by picking up a YA novel. And once I got back in, I, you know, reading took over, and that was great. That has been, you know, kind of gotten me through. But eventually I started writing a little, what I kind of call mini blog posts, notes from a pandemic, just little, I would find or take a photo and just write something about maybe the day. And I just sit and write it there in the moment and then just post it, because I had no idea how I would otherwise, you know, complete something. There was no sense of that. So I did that for months and months. And every once in a while, I still will post a note from the pandemic. That kind of got me through 2020, I think. And I did some journaling as well. But once 2021 hit, or maybe late in 2020, I started being able to kind of tackle some of my own writing again in a bigger way. So hopefully that will continue. But it's been very interesting and challenging, and I've found great solace in reading other writers' experiences of both writing through the pandemic, but even just living through the pandemic, and especially reading about parents and kind of, again, looking for that mirror of validation in this shared experience that we're all having.
Yeah, for sure.
So your book began out of a blog. You started blogging pretty early on about Fiona, and that how did that turn into a book? At what point did you realize that it was going to become a book? Or
so I started writing a blog when she was about one. Once I had like a good sense of the diagnosis and my sense of processing it, and then I blogged for until she was about 5. So for 4 years, and I never wanted to put pressure on the blog to like be a book, you know. It wasn't like I am writing a blog in order to write a book, or to attract an agent or something. But I did think that probably there would be a book, you know, or I would try to write one. Um, I wrote this essay called "Super Babies Don't Cry," and that was sort of like the mammoth essay. It was, I don't know how many words. It was maybe 4,000 or 5,000 words, but it was this essay that really tackled a lot of what I had to say about the culture of pregnancy, the expectations of women to make like perfect babies, and then where I internalized those messages, and then how I sort of how I grew out of them, and what I learned in the process of like meeting people with Fiona's syndrome and stuff. So that essay just attracted attention from my future agent and my future editor like the same weekend. And they both wrote me, and one said, I'm interested in representing you, and another said, I'm interested in a book that you might be writing. And it kind of just all fell together, which does not happen often. I feel like when it does happen, it's really nice to just go for that ride. And that's what happened.
Well, it was an incredible piece. It, you know, it makes sense. So
Thanks, Sally.
yeah, we are just winding down. We have just a few minutes left here before we head on to the next Zoom, where you will be reading from your book, and Stephen Kusisto will be moderating the Q&A. I'm so excited about both those things.
Yeah.
I would just want to say to all of our listeners, if you haven't read Heather's book, please read it. It's a gift. But I'll just close out with one more question. What do you feel like you've learned about yourself from the pandemic experience?
Oh, you know, it might be too soon. That might be like pandemic recovery diary number 10 or something. I mean, I think like right off the bat, one thing that I could think of is like, I deeply need more rest, and it's okay to take it. Just more and more rest, and that, you know, my tendency to overwork is still prevalent, and that's like just across the board, you know, and that it's not necessarily a virtue, and I really need to watch that. Yeah. Needing more rest, right, Sejal? Right on.
Yes, indeed. Agreed. Yeah, people have talked about the idea of writing about the pandemic, and I'm like, I feel like I'm years away from being able to write about the pandemic. I don't have any real clear vision of how to reflect on this time. We talk about it all the time.
Yeah.
And there, I hear our family and among friends kind of, telling some of the stories of this experience, but having any real perspective on it, I think it's going to take some time.
Yeah. The past tense verb has been really powerful for me. Like the fact that some of what we've experienced is in the past tense, and we can say that. Like I started writing poems where I don't know if they'll ever be published, but they're in the past tense about certain aspects that we went through that we won't probably go through again. And there's something just like, oh, so delightful about the past tense verb.
Yeah, that is huge. Fantastic. Well, I think we'll leave it there. Thank you so much, Heather. This has been fantastic. And I hope everyone who's on this call will join us in the next Zoom. Dan just put that in the chat, so you can follow that link, and we will get on to part 2 of our wonderful evening with Heather.